Hello, and welcome back to the podcast where you are invited for lighthearted conversations about things that matter as you seek to live your most meaningful, beautiful, and joyful life. I'm your host, Dr. Edie Wadsworth, and I hope you enjoy your stay here at the House of Joy. Hi, dear ones. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 238, and we are talking about 5 signs that you are operating from your ego and a few simple strategies for shifting more into living in your true identity as your true self. So, the ego has its place in our lives, and it is often functioning to protect us. So, the ego, the false self, the nature of the ego is to keep us safe, is to protect us, is to keep us from discomfort. The ego, is always trying to get us to avoid vulnerability, avoid anything where we can, truly be known. And so it definitely has its function, again, normally to keep us safe. Often it does that though by creating a lot of shame for us. And then when shame comes along, we hide. It's really hard for us to be our true selves. So I want you to pay attention as we talk about these 5 signs that you're operating in your ego. Number 1, the constant need for external validation. So if you're often relying on other people's approval, needing praise or acknowledgement to feel okay about yourself, seeking approval in a million ways through, sometimes we do this through social media, the constant need to be validated by our friends or our spouse, constantly seeking outside validation, and not really trusting our own selves and our own inner wisdom. And this is super, super common in women, especially in midlife. As a matter of fact, it's usually for those of us in midlife been a whole way of life. And it really prevents us from true connection. It prevents us from being really true to ourselves and being in real connection with other people. And so that is definitely a sign that we are operating in ego. Number 2, fear of disappointment or rejection. So I can tell you that I have operated with this fear myself, but this is sort of a deep rooted sense that I'm rejected, I'm abandoned, I am disappointing others. It often comes from past experience. And I can say that my own experience from my childhood led me to doing this and led me really to overcommitting, to a lot of people pleasing, to avoiding any confrontation or any difficult conversation. And it often leads us to really staying small, not going after our goals, not really even being in touch with what we really want because we, again, are afraid of being rejected, of being abandoned. And that's a real thing, you guys, because we were created to live in community. So when we sense that something might keep us from that, might put us out of the circle, out of the belonging, it's a really primal thing. It's a really primal fear. But learning how to recognize it can be so powerful because we don't want to stay stuck in this. We don't want to keep ourselves from the work we were called to do, the work we were meant to do. So ask yourself, do I have this sort of overwhelming or deep sense of disappointment or rejection? Number 3, overly attached to roles or labels. And this is so interesting because, as you probably know, I pursued a medical degree early in my life. I haven't practiced medicine now for almost 15 years, but I do think that I was seeking some label sort of as a sense of validation or whatever, but over identifying with roles that we have or labels that we have and losing sight of the deeper essence of who we really are. The ego loves a label. The ego loves saying, this is what I am, this is what I do. And often if we don't have that, or when those are challenged, or say, for instance, if you're in midlife and your roles are shifting, it can give us this sense of really feeling lost and feeling purposeless if we have over identified with a certain role that we have played in life. Number 4 would be really overly comparing ourselves to others and always measuring ourselves or competing with others, constantly measuring your own worth based on what someone else is doing with their life, their success, their achievements, and often making us feel sort of inadequate or jealous or some resentment when we see other people succeeding. This is definitely coming from the ego, and this is something that we want to create a lot of awareness around and a lot of compassion for ourselves. So we'll talk in a minute, kind of how we start to shift out of this. But the next sign, the last sign, number 5, would be living too much in the past or too much in the future instead of really being present with ourselves and with the other people in our lives. So I lived like this for a long time, being overly attached to the past. I overly identifying with the past. This is who I am. This is the, programming that I got from being a child, and sort of living with the heaviness of that and not believing that I could live my life without living underneath the heavy weight of my past. Some people have just the opposite, where they're overly obsessed with worried about the future, which causes a lot of chronic anxiety, overthinking, inability to really enjoy the moment and be present with the moment. So the ego likes to tether us to the past or tether us to the future, when really the only real connection we can have is right here in the present. And so if you see yourself, if you see any of those signs in yourself, just rest assured, we all do. But I think it can really be beneficial for us to create a lot of awareness around this so that we can begin living as our true self. And one of the really powerful, important ways to start shifting out of this is just confession, awareness and confession. Like, oh, I see myself there. I see where I do that a lot. I see where I'm overly attached to people's opinions. I see where I'm very fearful of being rejected. I see where I'm living in the past or future. And that confession can then help us recognize, like, oh, I don't want to do that. I really do want to operate from my true self. The ego is almost always operating from fear, fear of rejection, fear of the past, fear of the present. And true self, who God really created us to be in our full identity in Him, is always operating in love. So you just have to ask yourself, am I mostly operating? Am I mostly living my life from this place of fear or from a place of love? And when you create some awareness around it, you can see, like, oh yeah, I am still operating from a lot of fear in this area. And I want to create compassion for myself. I see why I've done that a lot. I had to do this when I was thinking about my past. Like, I can see why it was important for me to sort of wear my past like a badge of honor, but I can let that go and I don't have to do that anymore. And it creates so much freedom to be who I really am created to be. None of us were meant to live with our past as a badge of honor or as something that weights us down, as like a limiting set of beliefs about who we can be based on, how we were raised or who we've been or mistakes we've made or whatever. So really learning to ask ourselves, am I operating in fear or love? Am I motivated to do this thing because of fear or love? Am I in this relationship that I have with this other person? Am I operating in fear or love? We see a lot of this. When we look at what happened in the past election, we're always wanting to label other people. We're wanting to know, are they on my side or not? Instead of, how can I just have a genuine relationship with this person without all the labels? I think that can be a really powerful way for us to shift more into our true self, which leads us to really feeling so much more aligned in our lives, feeling so much more fulfillment, so much more peace, and really shifting into living in our true identity. I do believe that God, He created us from love, for love, to love. And where in our lives are we operating in fear that's really blocking the fullest expression of who God created us to be, to live out our giftings, the ways we were meant to impact and contribute to the world from love? So ask yourself, which of these am I struggling with most? And am I willing to create some awareness around it, some confession around it, so that I can shift more into living from love, the way God created me to be, the way my body functions best, the way my mind functions best, the way my heart functions best, without heaping on even more shame. So you got to have a lot of compassion for yourself. I can see why I have operated this way, bringing a lot of light to it, a lot of love, a lot of compassion, so that we can really shift in who we were created to be. And I think this is, what I often teach in my program, that when we are operating as our true self, we have this sort of commitment to growth. We have this real desire for true connection with ourselves, with God, and with others. We want to create. So if you've been feeling like, oh, I haven't really been wanting to create, or I haven't been feeling connected, you might ask yourself, oh, am I operating too much in my ego? But we feel this desire to create nourishing routines, to create things in our homes, to create things in our lives. And then we feel this overwhelming desire to contribute our gifts to others. If this is something that you have been struggling with, I want to tell you about an amazing free workshop I am teaching November 20th at noon, called Design Your Life, Live Your Purpose. It's free. It will literally change the way you live out the rest of 2025, you guys. I mean, the rest of 2024 and how you start 2025. If you go to ediewadsworthcoaching.com/90 days, you can register there. It's free. And we will talk all about how to really live in your true identity, how to ditch these coping mechanisms of living from ego and live as the true, free, loving people God created us to be. So I can't wait to see you there. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you soon again on the podcast. Bye for now.